Hello, we're reading a chapter a day from this book, Here If You Need Me by Kate Braestrup. And today we're doing chapter 10. This is the best job in the world, Don Carpenter announced. I love catching night hunters. I love working with Tiki here. I love being out in the woods. Even on a day like this? Yeah, this is great, he laughed. Don laughs a lot. Under a gray November sky, the sleet found its way through the branches of the leafless trees, making every surface slick, soaking our jackets and our safety orange winter caps. The rain managed to wick its way into the tops of my boots, too. It was just miserable. Typical tracking weather, Don said cheerfully. He's a very cheerful guy. We were walking through the woods, somewhere in the vicinity of Ellsworth, following Don's tracking dog. Tiki wasn't keeping to a trail in the human sense. She was trying to locate a scent trail that might lead her, and thus her master, to the place where the body of a suicidal young woman lay. The young woman left her baby boy at a daycare center and drove away. No one had heard from her since. Over the past couple of days, the state police dispatcher had been advising all units to be on the lookout for a blue Subaru hatchback, driver possible, 10:45, mental health issues. Despondent. Finally, a couple of hunters going to the sand pits to sight in their rifles found the car. The search commenced, and someone called me. There were a lot of trees growing in close proximity here, and some of them had fallen together in big areas of deadfall that Tiki trotted through without particular effort, but that Don and I had to clamber over, under, around, and through. Don and his wife are certified as therapeutic foster parents for severely abused and neglected kids. A little boy is the most recent addition to a family that already includes one adopted daughter, 3 biological children, and a lot of pets. Don described his new 5-year-old son with obvious affection, and his background with a sort of rueful horror. The boy had come into care when a New York City police officer came across him in a subway station in Brooklyn. His parents had told him to wait there while they went off to buy heroin to bring back to Maine. The child had been sitting in the subway station for 4 hours. Don is a devout Baptist. He's younger than I am, with bright brown eyes and an easy, good-humored demeanor. He has that enviable quality I see in some, though not all, religious people. It's as if, no matter what the circumstances, even staggering around in wet woods looking for a corpse, he's always centered and joyful, with well-being at his core. Don's wife is a social worker, and she probably has it too, though I haven't met her yet. In addition to her day job as the mother of 5, she is the supervisor of a group home for teenage boys. Do you two think you're doing enough for the community yet? I asked Don. I mean, couldn't you squeeze in a few more good works? He just laughs. Tiki runs around sniffing and snorting and occasionally dashing over to me for a quick, friendly crotch check. Don tells me that as a canine handler, he had been very lucky for a while. I found a whole lot of suicides and near suicides, something like 7 in a row over maybe 15 months. Tiki found a man hanging in a tree on a dark night, and when Don grasped the man's foot to check for signs of life, gas burbling through the strangled larynx produced a terrible groan. That was the one that gave me night sweats, he says, and my wife insisted that I see someone. Did counseling help? Oh, yes, Don agrees cheerfully. I wouldn't wait as long now. It helped a lot. Hey, Tiki, what you got? Tiki is indicating on the water in the stream. I follow Don's eyes, and we both search the ripples for the sign or shadow of a body. Don once found a woman, overdosed on barbiturates, passed out in a woodland stream, her core temperature reduced to 94 degrees. That was a great find, Don says. I got her just in time. She's still alive, works down at Shaw's supermarket. Now and then I go check on her just to see how she's doing. The woman we were looking for had also taken barbiturates. She had waited in the car for a little while, looking at photographs of her baby. Then she staggered off to die. She fell on the uphill side of the stream we had been walking beside. Rainwater trickling down the hill had carried her scent into the stream, where Tiki's sensitive nose had caught a whiff of it. When the call came over the radio that one of the other dog handlers had found the body, we learned it was more than a mile away from the place where Tiki had been indicating. The body lay in a little hollow behind a rock. Her name was Betsy. She had short dark hair, and her eyes were closed as if she were sleeping on her back there in the yellow leaves. Don, along with Wardens Hatch and Robitaille, went to the body. They began taking photographs of it in situ, in case the medical examiner or state police detectives would need them later. Lieutenant Trisdell and I walked down the road through relentless sleet to keep a rendezvous with Betsy's brother at an intersection where the road was a little less treacherous and sloppy. We would be giving official notification right there. As we walked, I fished my black clerical dickie out of my jacket pocket and fastened it around my neck. I tucked the edges under the lapels of my uniform coat. "Do I look okay?" I asked Fritz, turning in the sleet to model for him. "You look like the nuns who used to whack my knuckles with a ruler when I was in school. Listen, Reverend Mother, as long as you're here, couldn't you pray for it to stop raining?" "I'm a Unitarian Universalist. We don't do weather," I said. The lieutenant snorted. Fritz had Betsy's diary in his hand. The last entry was her suicide note. The diary had a bright blue cover and a bunch of little bits and pieces of paper, envelopes and whatnot tucked in here and there, and a pen stuck into the spiral binding. The brother's name was Dan. Dan and Betsy, Dan and Betsy, Dan and Betsy, I repeated to myself. Remembering the names seems the least I could do in a situation like this. So I try a foolish mnemonic. Damn the spot in the rainy woods where we found a bit of Betsy. We spotted the car coming and stood waiting in the roadway. Dan drove up beside the lieutenant and stopped. He rolled down the window. Tilting slightly forward, one hand on the roof of the car, water dripping from the brim of his cap, Fritz said, "I'm sorry. We found Betsy's body. I wish there was a way to make this easier for you, but she's dead." Dan nodded calmly. He didn't say anything. From the evidence we have so far, we think that after she dropped her son off at daycare, she drove out here, parked at a turnout just down this road. She had at least 45 sleeping pills, according to the labels on the pill bottles, and if she took all of those, it would have been enough to kill her. We found pictures of the baby in the car, and we think she probably sat there for a little while, looking at the pictures, and maybe she got some comfort from that. Then she left the car, walked up the hill, lay down in the leaves, and went to sleep. Dan nodded. "Thank you," he said. "This is our chaplain, Reverend Kate Braystrup." I stepped forward, shook hands. "I'm so sorry, Dan," I said. Dan looked up at me. His eyes caught on the collar around my neck, and you could almost hear something break in him. His whole body gave a violent shudder and folded inward on itself. Betsy had been suffering for a long time, Dan told me. I had gotten into the car by then. I was no longer a stranger. I had held him in my arms, so he spoke frankly. Their parents died in a car wreck when she was 17, and she never seemed to quite get over that, Dan said. She had a bad spell after the baby was born. And then her husband left, and there was really messy divorce going on, and Betsy was trying, really, she was trying. She was in therapy and on medication, but she just couldn't seem to get herself together. Dan asked me what was going to happen to the body. I told him the medical examiner would need to do an autopsy in Augusta and that the funeral home would transport the body there. When the medical examiner's office released the body, the funeral home would retrieve it and would call him to make further arrangements. Yes, the funeral home had his phone number, and they're good guys. They would take good care of Betsy. Can the church bury her? Dan asked me then. It actually took him a few rephrasings to get the idea across to me, so strange and alien was it to my way of thinking. Would a Christian church do a funeral for a suicide? Betsy had gone to a service at a church in Orrington the previous Sunday, Dan explained. He wasn't sure what the denomination was, but it was a new church. Anyway, the gist of the pastor's message, according to Betsy, was that suicide was the one sin that God never, ever forgave. I pictured Betsy, her short dark hair neatly combed, alone in a pew. My chest tightened with a harsh, disorienting anger. So it seems like, the church they might not let Betsy have a funeral there, be buried in their graveyard. Dan looked carefully at his hands in his lap, as if he were ashamed. I hate my clerical collar, I thought. I pictured Betsy at church with her blue diary, with her shameful, sinful despair exposed before the pastor and his pinched and stingy God. I said, and very carefully, after several deep and calming breaths, I don't know that pastor, personally. I don't know what he knows and doesn't know about severe clinical depression, which is what your sister died of. I placed my authoritative hand on the console between our bucket seats as if it were a pulpit. Dan, I said, look around. Obediently, he peered through the rain-washed windshield, up the road toward the blurry outlines of a half-dozen green trucks. In lieu of righteous anger, I heard my voice take on the sure and certain cadences of preaching. The game wardens have been walking in the rain all day, walking through the woods in this freezing rain, trying to find your sister. They would have walked all day tomorrow, walked in the cold rain the rest of this week, searching for Betsy, so they could bring her home to you. And if there is one thing I am sure of, one thing I am very, very sure of, Dan, it is that God is not less kind, less committed, or less merciful than a Maine game warden. I paused, gazing sternly into his startled eyes. You got that, Brother Dan? He was staring back. He didn't say a word. Oh dear, maybe he thinks I'm nuts. Maybe he's trying not to make any sudden moves. So I want you to know today, Dan, that there is no doubt in my mind, no doubt at all about where Betsy is right now. God is holding your sister close to his tender heart. Betsy is safe. She is forgiven. She is free at last from all her pain. Oh, Dan breathed. Oh. So, that's that, I finished rather lamely. I took some more deep breaths to recover. Would you like me to pray with you? Yes, I would, he said eagerly, gripping my hands. So together, there in the car, we said the 23rd Psalm. Love is my shepherd, I shall not want. Love makes me lie down in green pastures. Love leads me beside still waters. Love restores my soul. Amen. Amen. I tore a page from my notebook, borrowed Dan's pen, and wrote down the names of ministers in and around Orrington, fairly conservative pastors who knew the earth was round and knew something, too, of the etiology and course of acute mental illness. Dan took the paper, folded it carefully into thirds, and placed it in his wallet. When I got back to the scene, Warden Hannah Robitaille took one look at me and went off to find a big parka for me to wear on top of my wool jacket, since I had forgotten mine, and she was sure I was going to freeze to death. "Have you eaten anything?" she asked severely, and when I looked guilty, she fetched me half a sandwich from her cooler. While we waited for the funeral parlor guys, we rehashed the previous week's search for a missing hunter over in Kingfield. Up on the hill, Betsy's body waited in its saffron-colored bed. At last, the funeral parlor van came skidding through the mud. The funeral directors were wearing suits and ties and Oxford shoes and purple surgical gloves, surreally bright against the vivid yellow leaves. They offered to climb the hill to help get the body, but the wardens told them to stay where they were. "We'll take care of it." And I suppose I could have stayed by the van with them. I am the chaplain, after all, and a middle-aged mother of 4. I pray, I give bad news, I hug, I counsel. No one expects me to lug the dead out of the woods. But I told Betsy's brother, fiercely, that God would not abandon her. So I climbed the hill with Don and Hannah and Lieutenant Trisdale, who had held Betsy's blue diary in his gentle hand all afternoon. I helped load Betsy into the body bag and onto the stretcher, helped with the clumsy work of buckling straps around her knees and torso. I put my hand on her cold foot, as if she could feel my touch through the body bag and be reassured. She was not ugly or sinful, just dead. And I shall carry forever the image of her peaceful bluish face, a few yellow leaves clinging to her short dark hair. She looked like she was sleeping as Don zipped the shroud around her, sleeping as we bore her safely down the hillside under the low gray sky. The end of chapter 10.